Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 2. We're going to be starting in verse 12 this lesson. But before we begin, our theme verse for Lunch with the Lord is Jeremiah chapter 15, verse 16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, chapter 2, verse 12 to chapter 3 and verse 21 deals with God's judgment on Eli and his two sons. Now, up until this time, Elkanah and his family have been the focus of this first part of 1 Samuel. But now the story is going to change, and it's going to focus on Eli and his two sons. We will now see the reason why God is raising up Samuel to lead the children of Israel into their next phase of having kings. Now, verse 12, let's read verse 12. And it says, Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They did not know the Lord. Now, what were these two sons like? Well, they were not saved. We see that in this verse, chapter 2, verse 12. It says, they did not know the Lord. Number 2, they were worthless. And we see that in the same verse, verse 12, because it says they were sons of Belial. Now, number 3, they stole the offerings from God. And we see this in verse 14. We'll be seeing that in 2 more verses. Number 4, they bullied God's people. And we see that also in chapter 2 and verse 14. Number 5, they committed adultery right in the tabernacle. And that's seen in chapter 2, verse 22. And lastly, number 6, they caused the children of Israel to sin. And that's seen in chapter 2, verse 17, and also in verse 24. So, while it looked as if they were getting away with all their sin, yet God was preparing judgment to come upon them. At the same time, God was preparing Samuel to take over his work. Now, it says here in verse 12 that they were sons of Belial. As I stated back in chapter 1, verse 3 and verse 16, this was a term, this term, sons of Belial, was used to describe someone who was worthless, lazy, even those who practiced breaking God's law, as these two sons of Eli did. So, when it says sons of Belial, it does not mean that they worship Belial. It was just a phrase back then used to describe someone who was worthless. Now, let's read verses 13 to 16. And it says, And the priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came while the flesh was in seething, with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand. And he struck it into the pan, or kettle, or cauldron, or pot. All that the flesh hook brought up, the priests took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came there. Also, this is a key one now, before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, Give flesh to roast, for the priests. For he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. And if any man said unto him, let them not fail to burn the fat immediately, and then take as much as your soul desires, then he, meaning the servant of the priest, then he would answer him, no, but you shall give it to me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Now, one of the great sins that Hophni and Phinehas committed is here during the sacrifice of the peace offering. The law of Moses stated specifically how this sacrifice was supposed to be performed. The sacrificial animal was to be brought by the offer to the priests and then killed. The fat, now listen, the fat of the animal was to be burned upon the altar unto God. All the fat belonged to God. And it was to be taken and put on the brazen altar, and everything was to be burnt. Now, this was God's portion. Concerning the offering, God got a portion of the offering also. And God wanted the fat. That's what he said. Now, the breast of the animal was to be waved as a wave offering unto the Lord. The right thigh of the animal was to be given to the priests as their portion. So the priest's portion was the right thigh of the animal. Now, the rest of the animal was to be boiled, and it belonged to the person or family who they were making the offering. So everything was all divided up. Everything was specifically portioned out for each person. Now, what Hophni and Phinehas were doing was that they were taking a portion of the fat that belonged to God before it was burned. And also, while the person who was making the offer, while the offer's portion was being boiled in a pot or in a cauldron or whatever it was, they would come, and not them, but they would send one of their servants with a three-pronged fork and they would stick it into that pot, and they would take whatever that three-pronged fork would bring out. That's what they wanted. And if the offer, challenged the guy and said, look, you're not supposed to be doing this, basically the servant of the priest, they would threaten them and say, look, if you don't give it to us, we're going to take it by force. Basically going to come and beat you up. We're going to take it anyways. God said that the breast and the right thigh belonged to the priests. But they weren't, Hophni and Phinehas, they weren't content with the portion that was given to them. They weren't content with that. They wanted more. They had absolutely no fear of God and no respect unto the law. They were both stealing from God and also from the offer. Yeah. They were taking some of the fat that belonged to God, and they were taking some of the portion that was being boiled in the pot that belonged to the offer. But what would be expected from an unsaved person? Unsaved people don't believe in God. Therefore, to them, their office to Hophni and Phinehas, their office as priests was just a job and a way to better themselves by taking advantage of other people. I mean, you may say this is horrible and terrible. It is. It really is. It was bad what they did. But they were unsaved. They were just acting like any unsaved person around us that you go to work with. You go you go shopping with. You go to the store, you're surrounded by people just like there's tons of Hophni and Phinehas's all around us. Oh yeah. The unsaved people around us, and even, listen, and even some pastors and leaders in churches, they do the same thing. They either don't believe in God, or they have a wrong view of God, and they end up milking the people. But what they are completely blind to is that God sees and he knows everything. And that a price, listen, a price will have to be paid for this that they're doing unless they repent. Pastors, leaders of churches, elders, those that milk the people in however they do it, those that milk the people in the congregation, there's a price they're going to have to pay. They may get away with it for a while, but eventually that price is going to have to be paid. God is going to demand the price to be paid unless they repent. Now, God will give them opportunity to repent. God will convict their heart. He'll try to minister to them, to show them their sin so that they can come to him for forgiveness. But if they don't, there's a price to be paid. Although God is long-suffering to give them an opportunity to repent, yet God's justice will come. And when it does, there will be no going back. God, listen, God will not be mocked. God is going to make sure he gets his portion of the fat. That's right. There ain't no, you can steal from God. You want to stick that 3-prong fork into that thing and steal from the people? That's one thing. Yeah, that's sin and it's wrong. But it's a whole different thing when you start stealing from God's portion of the fat. Yeah, that is no good. Now, verse 17 says, "Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, because men," why? "Men abhorred the offering of the Lord." You know, the sad part is that those who truly want to serve the Lord are negatively affected by their sin against God. How many people in this world have rejected Christ, rejected the church, or stopped reading the Bible, or don't even want to read the Bible because they work with someone or they know someone who is a hypocritical Christian? Oh yeah, they profess to know Christ, but they swear. They tell dirty jokes. They do sinful things around them. It's seen. People watch. People know. And they profess to know Christ, and they may even have some kind of a verbal profession of that they go to church and they do this for God and they do that for God. Yeah, and then they're also involved in other sinful things. People see that. Unsaved world sees that. They don't want anything to do with God. They go to church, but maybe they steal. Maybe they tell bad jokes. Maybe they drink an excess of alcohol. Maybe they have anti-Bible views about politics or world issues. This is why it's very important that we live as an example of the Bible to those around us. Don't drive someone away from God because of how you live. Listen, Paul said it in 1 Corinthians 14. He said, look, if eating meat or is going to make my brother to fall, I'm not going to eat meat. I'm not going to invite somebody over and have dinner with them and eat meat if I know that they don't think eating meat is right. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to cause someone to stumble. And that's the same with us. We need to be an example unto the Lord for those around us. Now, verse 18, we're going to finish in verse 18, and it says, and Samuel told, verse 18, but Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child, girded with a linen ephod. Now, the writer of 1 Samuel, he brings up a sharp contrast between the selfish, covetous, godless service of Hophni and Phinehas and the quiet, devoted service of Samuel. As Hophni and Phinehas ministered unto themselves, Samuel ministered unto the Lord. It would be young Samuel that would bring God's message to Eli. And it would be an adult Samuel that would be used to re-establish the broken relationship between God and his people. Oh yeah. A young Samuel is going to bring the message of condemnation against Eli and his sons. But it's going to be after Eli and his sons are removed from the scene. It's going to be an adult Samuel that's going to, God is going to work through Samuel to bring back a respect for the service of God, for the offerings of God. God is going to use Samuel to bring back a proper respect for God's offerings. All right, we're going to continue on in verse 19 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.